Silo just spent an entire episode proving that its scariest character isn't the AI running the vault. It's the guy who follows procedure a little too well. Episode 5 of Silo Season 3 is called Memory, and on the surface, it looks like a cleanup episode. It answers the two questions everyone's been asking since the season premiere. How is Bernard alive? And why does Juliette suddenly have a mayor's badge she doesn't remember earning? Those answers arrive fast. What the episode actually spends its time on is something sneakier. It shows you that almost nothing you watched happen in the first 4 episodes happened the way you assumed. Somebody was engineering the outcome the entire time, and he did it using the exact rulebook he was supposed to be enforcing. Let's get into it. Quick housekeeping before the spoilers start. Memory is episode 5 of 10 this season, written by Catherine DeSavino and directed by Ark Avellino. It premiered on Apple TV on July 31st, 2026, and the next episode drops August 7th. Silo has already been renewed for a 4th season, which Apple has confirmed will be the show's last. So whatever gets set up in this episode isn't filler. It's foundation for how the whole story ends. And the episode earns that weight. Critics have been calling it the season's turning point, the hour where 4 episodes of scattered clues finally click into a shape. I agree with that read, but I think the more interesting story is how it clicks into shape. Not through a big speech or a convenient discovery. Through paperwork. Here's the situation at the start of the flashback. The rebellion has just ended. Juliette and Bernard both went through that burning airlock, and both are badly hurt. Camille Sims, freshly installed as head of IT, comes out of a meeting with the algorithm and tells her husband Robert, the head of judicial security, that 3 people are now considered existential threats to the silo: Juliette, Bernard, and former IT worker Lucas Kyle. She won't tell Robert why. She just tells him to handle it. Robert's version of handling it turns out to be the opposite of what Camille expects, and the method is the clever part. Because the silo is terrified of outside contamination, anybody coming out of that airlock has to be sealed in plastic and move through a whole chain of porters and pulleys before it ever reaches the incinerator. That's supposed to be a safety procedure. Robert turns it into a smuggling route. He wraps Bernard in the plastic sheeting himself, cuts a slit so Bernard can actually breathe, and lets the body get carried toward cremation on schedule on paperwork with witnesses. Then he diverts it before it arrives. Martha Walker and Carla McLain both help him pull it off, and neither one particularly likes him. They do it because they trust what Juliette and Bernard represent more than they trust Robert Sims. What makes this scene work is that there's no heist here. No lockpicking, no forged documents, no fight in a hallway. Robert uses the silo's own contamination rule as the getaway vehicle. The exact system built to keep outside danger from getting in becomes the system that lets a living man get carried out under everyone's nose. Saving Bernard is a rescue. What Robert does for Juliette next is closer to a campaign strategy, and it tells you a lot more about how his brain works. You can't hide Juliette. She's the woman who walked over the hill and came back alive, which makes her the single most recognizable person in Silo 18. There's no scenario where she quietly disappears. So instead of trying to hide her, Robert makes her impossible to remove. He goes to Sheriff Paul Billings and gets a very simple idea moving through the crowd that's already gathered around her. The silo just lost its mayor, and here's the obvious replacement. Within days, the population is asking Judicial and IT to install her. That single move changes Camille's entire risk calculation. Getting rid of an ordinary mechanic after a rebellion is one thing. Getting rid of a mayor the public just demanded, days after people already died fighting for change, is the fastest way to trigger the exact instability the algorithm exists to prevent. Robert didn't need to out-argue the system. He just needed to put Juliette on the side of the math where killing her becomes more dangerous than keeping her alive, which reframes something that's felt a little thin all season. Juliette's mayorship never looked like real power. It's looked more like a title with nothing behind it. According to this episode, that emptiness was the point. She wasn't elevated. She was made expensive to kill. Robert Sims has spent 3 seasons as one of the show's most reliably cold characters. He's interrogated by the book, raided apartments by the book, and enforced the relic ban without ever once looking like he questioned it. This episode doesn't erase that. Martha and Carla help him and still can't stand him, and the show is careful not to stage some big forgiveness scene. That restraint is the right call because what's actually changed about Robert isn't his method. It's who the method is now serving. There's a detail from the show's creative team that adds a layer here. Showrunner Graham Yost has said Robert's arc as a father was built into the character from early on. And once you know that, a lot of his choices this season read differently. He's not defecting because he's had some moral awakening. He's protecting the handful of people who are actually his, using the only skill set he has, which is knowing exactly which rule to bend and which form has to be signed. That's also, weirdly, what makes him more dangerous now than when he worked for the algorithm directly. For 3 seasons, his whole value to the system was that he understood the machinery from the inside. The algorithm just fired the one person in the building who knew every gap in its own procedures, gave him a grudge, and left him walking around with full judicial clearance. That is not a great outcome for the people who fired him. The episode also hands Robert a piece of information that reframes his entire career, and it comes from Bernard, who's been hiding out and finally starts talking. There's a classified order that exists only for the head of IT and their second in command, and it lays out something Robert never knew in 20 years of enforcing the relic ban. People on memory suppression drugs have to be kept away from objects connected to their past, because physical contact with those objects can undo the treatment. Robert has spent his career treating relics as a heritage crime, a law against nostalgia. What this order tells him is that the ban was never really about nostalgia. It's the security system built around a drug. Every raid, every confiscated photograph, every sentence handed down over an old watch or a toy, all of it existed to protect one chemical process from being reversed. Robert enforced that machine for 2 decades without ever being shown what it was actually guarding. So he starts using it the other way. He goes to Regina, the relic dealer, and gets her running a quiet supply chain. Counterfeit pills swapped in for Juliette's real medication, and Juliette's own confiscated belongings slowly bought back using badges stamped with her name as currency. That badge you may remember from earlier in the season, the one that looked like a bit of silo pop culture. A sign that people had started treating Juliette like a folk hero. It wasn't just merchandise. It was the funding mechanism for a covert medical operation. Once the show has all its pieces on the board, it runs a sequence that could have gone very sentimental and deliberately doesn't. Juliette starts handling objects from her old life, hoping to jog her memory back into place. Object after object gives her a flicker and nothing more. Then Hank produces the one item the show has been tracking since season 1. Her father's watch, kept safe through an entire rebellion, handed over with his dying friend's last words attached. It doesn't work. Not fully. What actually restores her memory is something almost comically small. A plastic duck-shaped candy dispenser that Robert has been quietly holding on to and finally returns to her on a stairwell, in the middle of warning her that Camille may be moving to have her killed. The moment she touches it, everything comes back at once. Not in fragments, the way the rest of the episode has trained you to expect, but all in one motion. I think that choice is the smartest writing decision in the hour. If the watch had been the key, the show would be saying, memory is about meaning, that the object with the most emotional weight wins. Instead, it's saying something colder and more accurate. The drug is a chemical process, and what breaks it is sensory contact, not sentiment. The suppression doesn't know or care what a toy means to you. And here's the actual reveal Juliette gets back. The safeguard, the doomsday failsafe, the show has spent an entire season treating like an abstract, unstoppable switch, turns out to be physical. The poison comes in through a pipe. It's infrastructure, and infrastructure can be capped. Juliette recalls that Silo 17, the ruined silo she barely survived last season, actually found and sealed its own version of that pipe before it ever fell apart from other causes. What she doesn't have yet is where the equivalent pipe runs in Silo 18. So what this episode hands the back half of the season isn't a location to walk to. It's a proof of concept and an engineering hunt through a building with 144 levels that were deliberately designed so nobody living in them would understand how they work. That's a much stronger hook for the rest of the season than a simple find the switch plot would have been. And it quietly turns Silo 17 from a cautionary tale into the one place that ever beat this specific weapon. There's a second, quieter countdown running underneath all of this, and it belongs to Carla McLain. Deep in critical supply, the room holding everything the silo can't manufacture underground, Carla reveals there should be decades worth of grow light bulbs left. There are 2 years worth. Someone has been stealing from the last irreplaceable stockpile on Earth, and empty boxes have been left on the shelves specifically so nobody walking through can count what's actually missing. That detail is worth sitting with. Keeping an empty box isn't about storage. It's about making the shortage impossible to calculate just by looking. It's the exact same instinct as the memory drug, just running on a population instead of a person. Control what people are able to know about their own situation. This also recontextualizes a murder from earlier in the episode. Orla Kent, revealed to have been killed rather than lost in an accident, wasn't just a rising officer. Carla had quietly assigned her to find out who was emptying that shelf, and that assignment is very likely what got her killed. Which means Silo 18 is being threatened on two completely separate clocks. One is the algorithm, which could kill everyone with a single order. The other is a handful of people quietly getting comfortable at the expense of the last light source the silo has. The episode only spends one short scene in the pre-collapse timeline, but it's a loaded one. Daniel Keene and journalist Helen Drew learn from Daniel's source that a man named Per Stenson, the public face of an AI safety advocacy clinic, and one of the most vocal voices in the country pushing to keep artificial intelligence restricted, was aboard the USS Nimitz on the night of a retaliatory strike called Operation Righteous Vengeance. Every other carrier that night launched dozens of sorties. The Nimitz launched exactly one, using 4 aircraft deliberately fitted with older, unencrypted equipment instead of the modern systems everyone else was using. That's not an accident. Somebody made a very specific decision to keep those 4 planes running on outdated tech, and the most prominent anti-AI voice in the country was standing on the deck when it happened. Before Daniel and Helen can get much further, their rental van takes a turn neither of them made. Something or someone has taken control of the vehicle remotely, and the episode ends there. The tidy explanation is that this is simple, era-appropriate hacking. Network chests or cars can be seized remotely, and we already know Daniel and Helen are being watched. The bigger implication is that whatever eventually runs the silo system might have just made its very first move on screen, 350 years before it starts telling Camille Sims who to eliminate. The show hasn't confirmed that connection yet, so treat it as an open theory, not a locked answer. But it's the kind of detail this show plants early and pays off late. Step back and look at what actually links both timelines this week. In the present, Juliette is having her past chemically taken from her by an authority that's decided the safest version of her is the one who can't remember what she found in Silo 17. In the past, something similar may already be starting, 3.5 centuries before there's a silo to put it in. That's the real argument memory is making. This isn't a story about protecting people from painful truths. It's a story about people who figured out, long before any of this technology existed, that the cheapest way to contain a discovery is to remove it from the person who made it. Robert Sims enforced that principle for 20 years without knowing that's what he was doing. He was never actually inside the system he thought he was serving. He was a tool of it, and this episode is the moment he finds that out. So here's where Season 3 stands heading into Episode 6, which drops this Friday, August 7th. Juliette knows the safeguard is a physical pipe, but not where it runs in her own silo. Robert Sims has quietly defected without ever declaring it, and his wife may already be putting the pieces together based on that final wordless look between them. Silo 18 has 2 years of light before the farms start failing, regardless of what happens with the algorithm. And 350 years earlier, somebody or something just took the wheel, literally, from 2 journalists getting too close to the truth. 10 episodes a season, 1 final season left after this one. Whatever answer this show is building toward, Memory just made it clear the answer was never going to be simple. If you want the deep dive on any one of these threads, the relic economy, the Robert Sims arc from Season 1 onward, or the Before Times AI mystery, let me know in the comments which one you want covered next, and I'll build the next video around it.